Welcome back. Now, over a week ago, a manager at Brown's Food Company allegedly assembled female workers to find out who had thrown a used sanitary towel in an incorrect bin. She made the women strip after attempts to get a confession were unsuccessful. Now, this sparked, for obvious reasons, outrage from Kenyans and has since gone all the way to court. Now, the incident, though, brought out a bigger conversation about period shame in general. Now, one of my guests tonight sparked that debate some months ago when she entered the Senate chambers with a red-stained white pantsuit. But before I introduce my panel, let me share some few statistics. Now, according to the World Bank, 95% of menstruating girls in Kenya missed 1 to 3 days of school. 70% said it had a negative effect on their grades, and more than 50% said they had fallen behind in their studies as a result. Now, couple that with 65% of women and girls in the country unable to afford sanitary pads. Now, joining me in studio, I introduced them a bit earlier, but Megan Mukuria, who is Zana Africa founder, and Senator Gloria Orwoba. Welcome to you both. You can now speak.
Great to be here.
Thank you for coming in. But let me start with you, Senator, because you are the one who sounded the alarm on the Brown's Food incident. What was your reaction when you got that news?
Actually, I got the information when it was happening.
Okay.
And we were trying to solve it behind the scenes.
I see.
I reached out to management. There was a lot of conversation before it spilled out to the public. And because, some of these incidences they're not isolated, but you also want to imagine that a company like Brown's Cheese it's not a policy that they were implementing. It's not a company that was, it's nowhere in the policies that you have to strip women and whatever. So we're trying to solve the situation, but unfortunately, I guess also the response and let me say, at that time, the people that were dealing with the situation didn't understand the sensitivity around it. And it just spilled over. And, once it goes on Kenyans on Twitter, then, yeah.
Yeah, it takes a life of its own.
It takes a life of its own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Megan, I'm sure being within this community and this advocacy space, why is period shame still an issue with all the work that's being done and sensitization? We're still talking about this today.
I mean, I think it comes from the same place that the wage gap for women comes.
Yeah.
It comes from the same place that gender-based violence comes from. It comes from the same place why we bully people, because we feel they're inferior. We feel that what's done to us, we're going to do to other people. And it's something that we can change. Our programs have systematically changed it and helped have gender equality and no period shaming for boys and girls. But we have to confront it, and I think that's what we're trying to do.
Confronting you did a few months ago when you wore that white pantsuit. I mean, it took headlines for obvious reasons. What happened? Because, the shock value, of course, got you in the news. But what happened since? What have you managed to do?
Oh, wow. A lot.
Yeah.
First off, I have managed to learn how to deal with online bullying. So that's one thing I had to figure out very quickly. But let me just say, from just simple stats, like what happened immediately after the incident, it was loud, the advocacy took its own life. We are now doing billboards and shouting about how to end period shaming. That was one clear thing that came out. Conversations started happening in the right places. Conversations have been happening with, the likes of Megan and people who have been in this industry for quite some time. But I feel like those conversations were now elevated to the people who are decision makers. So that happened. Yeah. Our budget moved from 260 million to 940 million. I can tell you that happened because I was knocking in the right doors. I was like, listen, okay, this happened to me, fine. Now I'm the period senator. But so what are we going to do about the budget, Right. So there was a lot of lobbying with the Minister of Gender, and we actually got a pledge of 1 billion, and we managed to get 940 actually allocated in this finance bill. So that's a big thing. Yeah. Another thing that happened is that I moved a motion in Parliament, and which also now moved to me tabling a bill in Parliament. And I know there's a conversation online. People don't understand. They're like, but there's legislation, so what have you tabled? We have had legislation, I think, since over 10 years. And the reason that legislation has not had any impact is because it was poorly drafted. Yeah, it was technically pegged on the political goodwill of whoever is in office.
Okay.
And so my bill tries to straighten out things by introducing a sort of authority, a committee of 9 members, and basically the stakeholders, you know. And, you know, the bill that was there also just was addressing school children. So what about the women in prisons? We subscribe to United Nations and some of the human rights and the convention. And some of the rules we have there is that the women in prisons, they still have their rights to menstruating dignity. So the bill also sort of addressed that. And the Glow's Pad Bank was like, guys are like, okay, fine, you've legislated. And so what, we can't wait. A piece of legislation takes up to between 18 and 24 months, if not more, to get into law if you manage to lobby the right places. So in between, as an intervention measure, we basically, I launched a pad bank, Glow's Pad Bank, and people contribute towards it. They bring actual sanitary towels. And we have distributed since May 27th, we have distributed to over 30 schools, over 10,000 sanitary towels, just from this one small initiative.
Right.
And the idea is just to showcase to different CSR organizations that, you know, if I can do it at this small level, I can't even begin to think what Safaricom, for instance, can do if they decided this is what they're going to jump on. Yeah. So I think a lot more has happened. The policy. Some of the partners that I have partnered with, I told them, you know, what does the policy look like for Royal Media? I'm sure you guys, even here as an institution, you're like, what are we supposed to do? Should we just put pads in the toilet? You know, there's a lot more than just having pads in the toilet. So we are just about to conclude the breaking down of the policy so that it looks like how, you know, for instance, a fire safety measure looks like, so that it's passed as a regulation under the relevant act. And then now you can go around to institutions, to factories, to construction industry, you know, and tell them, by the way, yeah, you're a construction company, this is a site, what does that look like for women who are menstruating? So those are the things that have been happening behind the scenes.
Right, and I'm sure this Browns incident really had many firms, companies thinking about how they handle that space. But let me come to you, Megan, because you've been in this community, this space, for years. And let's talk about how bad period shame can get. You know, I gave some statistics in terms of how many days from school girls miss, for instance. And, you know, a bit earlier on in the broadcast, I talked about the 14-year-old girl who took her life after she was shamed by a teacher. But how bad does it get, and why is it still a very serious issue?
I mean, there's stories every day about kids who stand up and stain their dress and don't come back to school. I mean, even the late Mutula Kilonzo, we had conversations way back around how one of his best competing people in his class in 6th grade was a woman. And then she stained her dress. And then now she was a shosha in the village, you know, having like 15 grandkids, and that was wonderful, but he missed her competition. And that conversation is still happening every day, right? And it becomes more extreme when you compound it with mental health issues, when you compound it with poverty, and it forces people to try to prevent it by all means necessary. So a lot of girls go to school with pads, but they're getting them from older sexual partners who they are not in an equal, safe relationship with. So it has deep, deep psychological consequences for generations and intergenerations now. And it happens in the companies as well. You know, it prevents women from moving up in companies. We did a study with USAID, and for every 100 shillings invested in menstrual health, 154 shillings comes back within 24 months and more, right? So these are really important policies and procedures to have, but they also make common sense. And we have to be having these conversations for schools and in corporate boardrooms. This is a conversation for the bottom line, as well as for dignity and rights. No, and let me come to you, Senator, because, I mean, we need to talk about improving access to these hygiene products. I mean, that's probably the biggest, and it covers that whole issue of period poverty. Exactly what Megan was talking about, girls having to sleep with someone to get a sanitary towel. I mean, it's, when you think about it, completely unacceptable. So how do we essentially do that? You talked about people donating and whatnot, but to scale that kind of operation.
So first off, I think, you know, when recently I went to Tanzania, and we are starting from ground zero. And they were like, we need to talk about taxes. We've been pushing for taxes. I'm like, yeah, Taxes are a good thing. Let's talk about taxes. But how can you talk about taxes when you don't even understand why we have the period poverty? You don't even have a policy. So, you know, I sort of was trying to paint the whole picture. Kenya was the first country in Africa to take out VAT and to take out the import tax. We are not zero rated. We've taken out the VAT and import tax. And that's many years ago. But so what's the impact? So we can talk about taxes day in, day out. We've already done something on taxes, but clearly it does not have the impact that it's supposed to have. Every time I have this conversation with people, they're like, oh, you're supposed to be the menstrual hygiene management ambassador. How can you even dare speak into increasing taxes? So let me tell you, we have people importing finished products to this country, finished products as sanitary towels. They get the VAT off, and they get the import tax off. And then you have companies, and I'm sure Megan knows more about this because she has a company and they are doing sanitary towels. So I'm not sure if it's locally manufactured or imported. Yeah. So you have this advantage of people going to China or wherever it is they're going. They import, they get the VAT off, and they get the import tax off. And then you have the local manufacturer who's creating jobs in this country, who does not get that advantage because the raw materials that they import is actually taxed. So by the time they come down to their final price, they cannot compete with these importers. So on one hand, we're talking about ending period poverty. We're not talking about ending the periods. We're talking about ending the poverty, right? How are you going to end the poverty when you're exporting our jobs to China? So I sat down with Waziri Moses Kuria and I was like, you guys need to understand what's happening. Actually taking off import duty is killing the local manufacturers. And it's not even helping the girls. It's not even helping the access to sanitary towels. I've done a little bit of research. You can actually get a packet of sanitary towels from China at 15 shillings on landing. But anything that you see in Kenya is, in fact, the cheapest is the locally manufactured at 48 shillings, right? So all these other people who are importing, who are, they're actually, the shelf price is from, retail price is from 50 shillings at the minimum, and the highest at around 450 shillings. They are marking up, and they cannot credit it to VAT because they don't pay VAT. They can't credit it to import duty because they've been exempt. Now, the local manufacturers are slowly shutting down. So you have local manufacturers that they look at their plant, and they're like, why should we even bother giving Kenyans jobs? Let's just leave this plant. Let's import those ones at 15 shillings, repackage them locally, and then pretend to be locally manufactured. The long-term effect is that then we don't have the jobs to offer. So if we cannot employ the women that we are trying to help, so we can talk all day and night about taxes, but literally what you've done, you've taken away the jobs and taken them to China. So I am for the opinion that, as a matter of fact, the import duty to sanitary towels, the finished product, should be increased, tripled if possible, so that we can now ensure that we have capacity. Most of these companies, they have capacity to actually locally manufacture. I'm sure Megan will tell you she has capacity to
That's music to Megan's ears, I'm sure.
They have, because she's employing Kenyans. She has a space where she can put up a plant. You just need to go and look at the initial. She's a woman, so she can even get the initial capital sponsored by all these people who want to push for women-led. So we have the capacity. We just need to refocus our policy and refocus our governance. And the people in leadership, they need to understand, by the way, you are actually increasing the poverty levels and you're not helping the girls. What can we do? Number one, in this finance bill that has just been passed, the raw materials for sanitary towels, the taxes that they were being charged and the levies have been taken out. Yeah? So that is a conversation. And this is the difference. People say like, oh, you came from the NGO world. The difference that we have, and I wish we would have more people coming from the NGO world sitting in legislation, because the civil society have a better view and they understand the problems that are there. The problem is they always say, we are bipartisan, we don't do politics. We must start doing politics because now, as I sit on a political table as a legislator, I can tell Waziri, this is wrong. Let's go this direction. This is right. And I have that opportunity to influence.
We're about to wrap up, but I need to hear this from Megan in terms of what Zana is doing, because and just the need to have more local producers in terms of meeting that demand.
Yeah. So we are the only company in the world that has intellectual property on non-wood and blended materials, so we can actually enhance farmers' revenue, right? Create local jobs. I'm really excited about the goodwill from the State House, right now in local manufacturing, and there are a lot of conversations right now talking about how can we do public-private sector partnerships, how do we take the goodwill of the 940 million shillings and invest that in local infrastructure that can last and can bring down the prices. I would love to see those 15 shilling pads because the challenge is a lot that low-income women need a lot from their pad, and that's a very expensive product. But we are trying to manufacture large-scale locally to serve all of East Africa, not just Kenya, but also combining that with a free hotline to help offer support for reproductive health education and safety and all of those things, as well as we have a curriculum with our nonprofit that's scaling with Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development into the school system so that we can systematically end period shame by just normalizing puberty and changes in our bodies,
Right.
But so I think she forgot to say that in her plan, you're going to have local, because currently you don't have local, you're not manufacturing local.
Yeah, I mean, getting a manufacturing plant is expensive. So we're in the process of talking with a current local manufacturer about a partnership to manufacture locally. I would love to, in 2 or 3 years, be able to manufacture, if not sooner. I mean,
honestly, Victoria, this is my message to anybody who's in that industry. We have everything. And the government is even offering partnerships in forms of a lease. For instance, in Naivasha or at the river, Konza, Technopolis, we have created that environment for you to come and set up infrastructure. And at one point, there is just no excuse not to set up local manufacturing. That's my take. Like, if we truly, sincerely want to deal with the issue of poverty on all levels, not just this industry of sanitary pads, all levels, it is just time to invest in this country. So, I mean, the CSR behind it, you know, I have companies that are like, you know, we bring from China, but we can do CSR with you. I'm like, no. Stop bringing from China. I'm not going to do CSR with you. Start manufacturing here. Locally, what can I do to help you or facilitate or push forward your plans to start manufacturing those pads locally? And, you know, my vision, Victoria, is that once we are past the policy, we are past the bill and all that, once this is set up, my vision is even to go and say, in those regulations, yes, we are going to follow the Procurement Act of 2015 when we are dealing with this money that has been allocated by government. But we have to be able to say, okay, government is allocating 940 million. Why should a single cent of that 940 million go to China? Let us limit it to the local manufacturers, period. So, I mean, if at that point you're not a local manufacturer, if we get there, when we get there, you have no business bidding for government tenders to take our money to China. Let the local manufacturers come and compete so that they can do two things. The domino effect is that they will create jobs and they're going to give access to this product. And I think we just need to be bold enough to say it. It needs to end. We just need to stop importing sanitary pads or menstrual hygiene products from outside. We have the capacity, let's make them.
Amen.
Period.
Period. Period.
On that note, thank you so much, Megan and Senator Horoba, for coming in. This, of course, is a conversation we have to keep going to normalize and hopefully end period shame for good. All right, let's take a short break here on Citizen Weekend Sports News. Coming up next.